Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this second Lunch and Learn for learning more about what is happening with social studies in Rio Rancho Public Schools. This is the second of the year so far for the 2022-23 school year. My name is Wyndham Kemsley. I'm the Communications Director for Rio Rancho Public Schools, and I am joined by Erica Lozano, who is a secondary curriculum and instruction coordinator for the humanities for Rio Rancho Public Schools. Before we get started, I want to go through a few short housekeeping items. We don't have a live chat function for this presentation, so we ask that if you have questions or comments, or if you need more information from us, please use an email that will be provided to you at the end of the presentation, as well as a form. We are working on making this presentation and these lunch and learns more engaging and more interactive going into next year. So please keep an eye out for that in the lunch and learns coming up in the future. But as far as information goes, I think that's all that we need to go over right now. So I'll go ahead and pass the time off to Erica for the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Wyndham, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you. If you're returning from session one, it's great to see you again. And for those who are new to today's session, welcome. I'm really excited to explore social studies at the secondary level with you today. I'm going to go ahead and open up our presentation. All right, here we go. So as Wyndham said, this is part 2 of our series for Lunch and Learns to learn about the new social studies standards. I'm going to go over just some logistical and background information before we dive into today's topic, which is instructional shifts for social studies. And we're really going to dig into what that means and why that's important for the work that our teachers are doing, and most importantly, for the students who will engage in these standards in the next several years. This is a recap from last time, but I want to continue to reiterate why you see puzzle pieces throughout this presentation. And that's just a reminder that we are all part of a big puzzle that comes together to support our students. And so I'd just like to thank you again for being here today, because you are a huge part of that puzzle, whether you're here as a parent, a staff member, or a community member. We thank you for the work that you do to support and serve our students in Rio Rancho Public Schools. Just a reminder, and in case you're working with any other community members or you're corresponding with any other parents or staff, while these sessions are live one Wednesday a month from 12 to 1, they're also always available afterward as recordings on our Rio Rancho Public Schools YouTube channel. So just a reminder that you can go back there to review this content should you ever need to do so. I will have a couple places throughout the session, just like I did last time, if you are returning, where I'll allow you some time to pause and reflect. If you want to stop and grab a pen and pencil, or open up a digital notepad on whatever device you're on to take some notes, you're more than welcome to, especially if there's anything that arises that you have questions on and you'd like to add to the forum at the end of the session. We'll be happy to get back to you about those questions that you do have. So once again, I'm Erica Lozano. I am the secondary coordinator for social studies and English language arts, otherwise known as the humanities. I always like to note that I'm a parent of a Rio Rancho Public Schools student as well. And then last time I talked about my love for green chili, but I also wanted to say that I am a huge fan of I Love Lucy. And a fun fact is that I got to study the I Love Lucy show through a historical lens in college. So I love history, and I love especially studying those little nuances of history and those stories that are often told in kind of mainstream history courses. So that's a little bit of what we'll dive into today as well. So last time that we presented at the first Lunch and Learn session, we talked about the K-12 content standards overall. And even though we really focused on 6th through 12th grade through that secondary lens, we hit on a comparison of the old standards and how they compare to the new standards, and really the intent behind the change, and why those standards are so relevant and important in today's world. So we're going to dig even deeper today as we look at the 5 instructional shifts for social studies in grades 6 through 12. Now, I will note again, like I did last time, that even though we're looking at things through a 6th through 12th grade lens today, these instructional shifts do apply at the elementary level as well. So if you are here today as the parent of both an elementary and a secondary student, or maybe you just have kiddos in elementary and you're wanting to see what's coming, know that these instructional shifts do apply at the elementary level as well. Here's an overview of how we're going to explore the shifts. We are going to first look at a definition of them. So really looking at what is an instructional shift. I don't want it to become one of those buzzwords in education where it's what people are talking about, but we don't dig into what it means. So we're really going to dive into that today and look at what an instructional shift is and why those are critical when we're looking at new standards. We're going to actually look at what those 5 shifts are, and I'll have examples of where those really surface in our units of study going into the 23-24 school year. And then finally, at the end, we'll have the information for you, like Wyndham talked about at the beginning of the presentation, where you'll have an opportunity to submit questions or provide feedback on today's session. And then, as he mentioned, as we go into these sessions in the new calendar year, we will have more opportunities to engage. You'll notice that today's session will probably be shorter than an hour, and that's because I don't have the opportunity for that back and forth with you today. So I want to give you the information that you need, provide you the opportunity to ask questions through the form at the end. And then as we make these sessions a little more engaging moving into the spring, then we'll probably go the full hour. And I really look forward to that. And that's what I just talked about. I was a little ahead of myself. So I'm going to skip that slide. That's just a recap of what I just said about engagement. So I want you, as we go through the next couple of slides here in the presentation, I really want you to think about what the word shift means to you. So when you think about things shifting, what are some common characteristics that really connect back to the meaning of that word? So again, the first part of today is really to dig into what that means, and now we're going to look at the meaning through a historical and social studies perspective. So I always like to pull definitions specifically from our state public education department, because this is the work, or these are the words that we use and the definition that we use here in Rio Rancho Public Schools when we're working as a team of teachers who are reviewing instructional materials, learning about the new standards, and talking about what they look like in the classroom with the students that we serve. So NMPED, or the New Mexico Public Education Department, says that shifts articulate ways that teachers can strengthen their instruction while also impacting the design of curriculum and assessment. They represent the ambition set forth in the standards, but also reflect exemplary practices that can be found right now in social studies classrooms. So while these shifts are brand new to our state and to our teachers in writing, and this is something that's come up a lot this year, the exciting thing about this is that a lot of this is already happening in classrooms across our district and across our secondary campuses. So when you look at these today, know that while we have a lot of learning to do as a district, we also have a lot of practices already taking place in classrooms that are examples of what these shifts look like in practice. Please note that anything you see in blue afterward, if you go onto our community website, which will be linked at the end of this presentation, you'll be able to access the PDF of this presentation, and you can click on any of the blue hyperlinked resources if you'd like to explore these further. So I want to give you an analogy of where the instructional shifts really lie in terms of our standards and our instructional practices in the classroom. So if you think about a tree which has its roots deep in the ground, the trunk or the core of the tree, and then the branches and the leaves that come off of the trunk, we're going to look at that in terms of our instructional shifts, our standards, and then what that all looks like in the classroom. So the instructional shifts, and this ties back to that definition that we just looked at, really are the roots of what it is that we're teaching. So they guide us toward what the standards should look like in the classroom, and how we should engage students in those standards. So then the standards really are the trunk of the tree. So that's the core, that's the strength that provides guidance in terms of what it is that teachers teach and the learning that students engage in on a daily basis. And then the branches of the tree and all of the blooms and blossoms that come from there, which I think is the most beautiful part of the tree, really are those instructional best practices. And that's where teachers are bringing their creativity and their ideas for how they engage students in those core foundational pieces, which are the standards and the shifts. I like analogies a lot. They help me to remember things, so I thought I'd use that one as we talk about the shifts today. The other important thing to note about our instructional shifts is that they really do play a huge role in the work that we're doing right now to select instructional materials for the next 6 years. So before we did anything regarding the standards, our instructional materials committee at the beginning of the year really analyzed and studied these 5 shifts so that as we review and evaluate instructional materials, we're ensuring that the materials that we select for students really are rooted in those best practices, and the guiding principles that lie behind the intent of the new standards that we're going to implement starting next year. I always like to point to other times in recent history where things in curriculum and instruction have changed. So instructional shifts are not something that's new to New Mexico or even new to social studies. So you can see here that these are some other more recent shifts that have taken place that have had a dramatic impact on what instruction looks like in the classroom. So back in 2010, which if you think about it now, our current seniors have had Common Core since their kindergarten year. There were huge shifts that took place in ELA and math. And I know most people who are on this call are probably familiar with some of those shifts. They've been a huge point of discussion for over a decade now. And then more recently, science experienced major shifts in New Mexico with the adoption of the Next Gen standards in 2018. So just some historical references there as we look at this next kind of dot on our timeline of major instructional shifts in New Mexico with social studies starting next year. So as we look at the information that I just shared with you and also going into the next part of our presentation today, I want you to think about what your big takeaway might be in terms of what we've learned so far in regards to the instructional shifts. What's so important about them? Why are we dedicating an entire session to instructional shifts in social studies today? So think about that for a minute and how you might communicate that information to other members of the Rio Rancho Public Schools community. Okay, I'm going to move into the second phase of our presentation today where we're actually going to look at the 5 shifts themselves. I'm going to show you the actual name of the shift, a little bit of the definition of it, and then I'm also going to give you an example of what that looks like in our units of study that we have drafted for next year. As we look at this, and I think this is something that even I forget sometimes, and I have to consistently remind myself that social studies for our students and for our world today is as much about studying, analyzing, and evaluating what has happened as it is about understanding how to impact, engage in, and reflect on who we are and what is to come. And I think that's one of the big takeaways I had when I looked at what you're about to see in these 5 instructional shifts is that this isn't just about looking at what has been. It's about looking at who we are now and how we can impact history and how our students can impact what happens in the future. And I think you'll see that as we dive into these. So these are the 5 instructional shifts. I'm not going to read them right now because, like I said, we are going to go over each one. But I do want to note here that all shifts are created equal. So even though I have them numbered here, that's just for reference. so that it's easy for us to keep track of what we're talking about, and we can reference back to them by number, but please know that there is not one that's more important than the other. The numeration here also does not note what order teachers should introduce them to students in the classroom. They're really meant to be intertwined with instruction and to surface in classrooms at many different points and times throughout the year. So shift number one, and again, if you'd like to look at the full document, it is hyperlinked here. And again, the PDF of this presentation will be on our community website after this presentation has concluded today. So shift number one focuses on moving away from a singular dominant narrative. And then I've included here just an excerpt or a little snip from the document that is hyperlinked, where the shifts are defined in detail by the New Mexico Public Education Department. But when you think about social studies, oftentimes when we hear stories about events that have taken place, they're more interesting when we hear about them from multiple perspectives. But sometimes when we have textbooks or certain adopted materials, sometimes some of those really rich stories are not included. And so one of the big pushes as we move forward and we look to adopting new materials is to make sure that stories from different perspectives are told and the resources that our students use to learn about different contents in social studies each year of their education. And this is something that is practiced in other disciplines as well. In English language arts, it's been a practice for many years now, especially since the adoption of Common Core, where we look at literature through different perspectives of authors and characters from different backgrounds. And so that shift is really taking place in social studies, and it's coming front and center to the work that we do as educators. So here's an example, and within each of these slides, the way that I've organized this is I've told you what subject this is coming from. So for example, this particular example that I'm using about shift number one is from 7th grade New Mexico history. The unit that it's coming from is called New Mexico's Road to Statehood. So in this instance, students would be studying how New Mexico came to be a state. And then through this lens of moving away from a singular dominant narrative, students are going to be asked this question: how did New Mexico's road to statehood impact the people of New Mexico? And you'll notice here that different groups are noted. So indigenous people, the Spanish, Mexicans, and Anglo-Americans as well. So really looking at that period in our state's history from multiple perspectives and telling multiple stories as students engage in this unit on New Mexico's road to statehood. So now we move to shift number two, which really focuses on students and teachers crafting questions that spark and sustain inquiry. So in some grade levels, that's the teacher crafting the question and presenting it to the students. And in some instances, especially in high school, it could be students crafting those questions as well. So again, we're going to look at, some units of study in the past might have asked students something like, what was the outcome of World War I? And if you'll notice here, that's a Googleable question. So I could type that into a Google search bar, and I would know from maybe a couple of different sources what the outcome of World War I was. Well, we're trying to move away from that with our new standards. We're trying to ask students questions, again, that are compelling and that represent enduring disciplinary problems and issues. So while it is important to understand the outcome of World War I, it may not be the end goal of that particular unit. So let's look at an example. This one is from 11th grade U.S. history, and the unit focuses specifically on the Great Depression and the New Deal. So the question for that unit asks students, what responsibility does the government have to the well-being of its citizens? Notice how no part of that question actually references the Great Depression or the New Deal. Instead, students will be using the content from that era in order to answer this particular question. And that's important because we don't want students to leave a unit and think that that question only applies to that era in history. We want students to be able to look at other eras in history and ask the same question, even asking the same question in today's world. So again, you might find some answers on Google, but there's definitely not one answer to this question about the responsibility that a government has to the well-being of its citizens. Students would likely have to take from multiple sources in order to answer that question, and that's really what we're wanting students to do as they engage in these new standards. Shift number 3, I think for me, when I look at this one, this is the big first step that we're kind of taking as we look at new instructional materials this year, and that is integrating skills and content purposefully. So there is a belief sometimes that we can separate skills from content, that we can teach students skills and then we can teach them content and they don't have to be married together at any point in time. But that's not true with our new standards. They have to be intertwined, they have to be connected in order for students to truly get at the heart of the standards. And that's to be able to take their learning and apply it in other settings and apply it to other events and eras in history. This is really that part of having students be not just college and career ready, but also civic ready as well, so that they can be active and responsible citizens in their communities at whatever level they choose. So here's an example of that from 10th grade world history. The unit is titled Themes and Timelines. This is actually the first unit of the school year before students actually dive into their first kind of thematic unit. This one is getting them ready to engage in the content of that next unit. And the question says, how can looking at the same information from different perspectives pave the way for progress? So in this question, the content would be the different perspectives, but then the skills embedded would be comparing and contrasting those perspectives in order to determine how a pathway for progress can be made. And so again, those questions really lead to the shift of integrating skills and knowledge at the same time. Shift number 4, I'm going to go ahead and read it because it's a lot and then we'll break it down. But this one says, provide opportunities for communicating conclusions through productive student discourse and taking informed action. So in a nutshell, this really is asking teachers and school districts to provide opportunities, both inside and outside of the classroom, for students to really get engaged in action-oriented experiences that culminate what they're doing in their unit. So while this one it maybe won't show up in the classroom until you get to the end of a unit, because students need to have those integrated skills and content to be able to, and what it says here, consider, discuss, debate, plan for, and undertake action-oriented experiences. So I'm going to show you an example. In 12th grade economics, for instance, as students are studying globalization, they might have to ask, what solutions can you think of that might reduce the human and environmental impacts of global consumption, inflation, and recession? So again, I'm not going to break down all of the content behind that, but as students are posed this question, they might go throughout the unit learning about a lot of the content that's embedded in here. And then by the time they get to the end of the unit, they might have a culminating project where they actually have to propose one of these solutions in a real world situation. That may be doing a project inside the classroom, or it may be taking it outside of the classroom in some way, and having that real world impact on the local, regional, statewide, or even national level. And those are more decisions that are made as curriculum teams come together and plan those projects. One thing I like to note here is that unless a teacher really wants to do this on their own in Rio Rancho Public Schools, this would be more something that one of our curriculum teams would develop together. We would develop the project together. We would compile the resources and make sure that teachers have a lot of support to do this in the classroom, because it is a big undertaking And so, as you'll see in a minute, as we continue our learning with these shifts in our district, this might be something that we see surface in classrooms in the years ahead, maybe not immediately in year one, because we have a lot of learning to do. But I guarantee there are some teachers who are going to jump on this right away because they're excited about it. And then finally, shift number 5 is empowering students to develop agency and pride in their identity. And I love this quote here that the New Mexico Public Education Department included. And it says, in order to learn about the world around us, students must understand and take pride in their own identity. What this looks like in the classroom is something that we're still developing. And at our next session, when we look at what the standards look like at each grade level, we'll have some more tangible examples for you. But I want to show you one example now. And this is from 12th grade government in a unit all about citizenship. And the question asks students, what actions can you take as a citizen to participate and solve problems in government? So again, if we go back to the language of the shift, that's helping students to learn about the world around them, and then also understanding who they are so that they can take that informed action and have that agency in their world. So again, these shifts are all enormous in their content. They're enormous in their application. But what we want you to know is that this is something that our district is taking one step at a time. And we are really being thoughtful about how we engage teachers in this professional learning, and then also provide some really authentic and organic opportunities for students in the classroom so that this learning feels meaningful to them, and most importantly, it feels like learning that they can take into their world beyond a K-12 education, which is ideally the main goal of social studies, is to ensure that students can be active and impactful citizens in society. So I want you to think about, as students begin to come home from school in the year ahead, how might their conversations change in terms of what they've learned in their social studies classes? I think a lot of parents and community members are going to find that the conversations might sound a little different. And we're excited about those conversations. We're excited to hear about what students are excited about and how they feel that that they're active participants in history as well. As I said earlier, embedding and surfacing these shifts in the classroom really isn't meant to be rushed. We have talked a lot as an instructional materials adoption committee and as a content team, and we're really going to take the next 3 years and then beyond to continue our learning on these shifts and implement them in the classroom in a thoughtful and meaningful way. We certainly don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed, and we want to make sure that the learning is authentic and that students are able to dive deep instead of skimming the surface of everything, just in an effort to make sure we get it all in. And that's what we don't want to do. So we're gonna pace ourselves and dive deep and make sure that our social studies lessons continue to feel meaningful for teachers, and that they're given the time and space that they need to craft those really meaningful lessons, as they already do, but continue to do so with the new standards that we have in place. So that brings us to the third phase of our presentation for today, which is what Wyndham referenced at the beginning. I'm going to share with you the link to submit questions and feedback to our team, and then I'm going to give you a preview of what's to come. So this is just a recap of where we are. So we just talked about the instructional shifts for social studies. And then coming up on January 11th of 2023, I can't believe that's just around the corner, we're going to talk about grade level learning outcomes for students. So this is the one where we're going to dig into, what do these standards look like for a 7th grader, a 9th grader, an 11th grader, because it does change and it does build from one year to the next. And I don't know about you, but as a parent of a Rio Rancho student, that's really what I'm excited that is what I would be excited to learn about. So I can know exactly what my student will be doing in the year ahead. And then we're going to dive into the instructional materials review process, and then continuing that kind of trajectory for the rest of our Lunch and Learn sessions. And then we will end with a Q&A session after we have recommended to the board what instructional materials we would like to adopt for the next 6 years. So we invite you to continue to join us in these sessions, and I really look forward to those increased engagement opportunities next time. So again, mark your calendars if you can, or plan to hop on and review the recorded session on Wednesday, January 11th from 12 to 1. And with that, I will leave you with our form, so you can type in these links directly into your internet browser so that you can submit feedback for today's session. You can explore our website where we have more information about the resources shared today, as well as frequently asked questions about the standards, or you can contact us directly at the email address rrpscontent@rrps.net. Thank you so much for coming today. It was a pleasure having you.